2. Thanks for your attention in part 1. Anybody guess what this one is? Very territorial. They're quite aggressive little birds, unless there's plenty of food, of course. I mean, last year I had 5 robins through the winter, maybe 6, but certainly I saw 5 separate ones through the winter, and they were getting on quite nicely because there's plenty of food. But if there's not much food, they will get quite aggressive. And interestingly, males and females both hold the territory in winter. They both have their own little patch. But again, if there's plenty of food, they're not going to be quite so interested in fighting. And people ask me, are the skinny ones young ones, or the females? No, there's all sorts. Robins come plump or skinny, a bit like humans. They sing virtually all the year. There's a spell around about September when they don't sing because they're changing their feathers. They go into eclipse. They don't want to attract attention to themselves because they don't look very pretty. But more importantly, they can't fly so well because, of course, their feathers aren't perfect. So they don't want to attract themselves, make themselves attractive to a predator. So they tend to keep their heads down for about 3 weeks, month or so, and then they are back to full glory again. They're mostly ground and bird table feeder. They love mealworm, but they're quite happy on the ground, where they're susceptible to cats, of course. But they're also happy on the bird table, and they've actually started to. They mastered the squirrel-proof bird feeders in my garden now. They actually can perch on that and eat quite nicely off them. They really eat in the wild invertebrates, worms and grain, and it's good fun watching them digging up little worms in the garden. They nest in woods, copses, gardens and sheds, anywhere. They're quite happy around out human company. A lot of reports of car engines and on top of wheels of cars that have been parked for a while. They also, their nest boxes are slightly different to bird tit nest boxes. So if people are making nest boxes, it's best to sort out what bird it is you're trying to attract, where to position the box, how big to have the hole, and what sort of hole to have. So it's not just a question of putting a bird box up and expecting one size fits all. It doesn't work that way. They have 4 to 6 eggs and up to 3 broods. And I'm making a slight exception here. I'm putting the juvenile in. The males and females look the same. It's amazing how many people, when I put a picture of a juvenile robin up around about August, September on the Home Firth Wildlife Facebook page, people say, "Oh, I've seen those birds. I didn't know what they were." Well, there we are. That's a juvenile robin. As you can see, a faint trace of orange, but almost thrush-like markings across the front, spotty, or even blackbirdy. So they don't look like robins initially, but there you are, a juvenile robin. Now we come to our old friend the blackbird. This one is taken next door neighbour's garden, and they love the yellow rowan berries. The thrushes and the blackbirds fight like mad for these yellow ones. Not only a woodland bird, of course, but although it is garden bird now, sing during the mating season, and when they've just had family eggs, they will sing from a prominent perch. What they're really doing is saying, "This is my territory, keep away." It's an absolutely beautiful song, and you'll sometimes hear 2 or 3 around the area, depending on how many nests there are. And it is absolutely fantastic. Territorial. They'll scare off other blackbirds on the patch if there's not enough food to be had, and especially this tree here, this particular blackbird would not let anything else on it. The male has a yellow beak, so distinguish it, and it's also black, or looks black. It isn't actually black, and whereas the female is brown with a slightly duller beak. They're mostly ground and feeders and bird table feeders. They make attempts at the hanging feeders, the nut feeders, but they're not particularly good at it, and they have to keep flapping. But they do make a good fist of it, and they are entertaining to watch, but mostly on the ground. They eat worms, berries, and insects, and normally rather than bird table food. Nesting may begin as early as February, but generally around about Aprilish around here, in a bush or a tree. 3 to 5 eggs and up to 3 broods. Interestingly, when the hatchlings are kicked out of the nest, and believe you me, they just come out of the nest, they can't fly, you might see them skulking around in dark parts of your garden, And the male and the female split parenting responsibilities between them at this stage. So one will take a couple of birds, another will take another couple, and they then feed them until such time as they're a bit more independent, or they can fly a bit. But of course, then the female goes off to make a second nest, so the poor old male becomes even more harassed. But they survive. But it's amazing when you see a fledgling blackbird straight out the nest, skulking down below, try and keep the cats away because they are instant cat food. They are. And this is a female. As you can see, the male was enjoying a berry, but the female has got a right smorgasbord there of a little baby slug, a worm, or something else, and she's taking that back to her nest. And she was nesting in this, funny enough, in the same Leylandii weed bush as the colt, I think, was nesting. Goldfinch. There's been stacks of these this year. I've got flocks of 15, 20 coming into the garden at any one time. It's been a really good year for goldfinches, and they're beautiful little birds, and they are entertaining, especially when they start quarrelling. They usually hang around in small groups. I've seen 3s and 4s before, but never seen 15s and up to 20 in my garden before. Really is good. And if the feeding's good, yeah, they make bigger groups, and sometimes with other finches. Like sunflower seed and Niger seed in feeders, and they're very quarrelsome about it as well. If there's not enough perches on the feeders, they'll have a go at each other. I always find it interesting that you hang a Niger seed feeder up and it's plastic, and you think, well, how the hell does anything find its way into these feeders? But sure enough, the goldfinch find them, and I can only assume it's smell. But anyway, Alf might tell us later how it's done, but it fascinates me how they know when you put a new feeder up that there's some food there for it.
That's failed.
In the wild, they on thistle, teasel, dandelion, ragwort seeds, etc. And it's great if you go past a field and you can see them or hear them first twittering, and you see them on the thistle bushes. And if you've got binoculars or a decent lens on your camera, there's some fantastic opportunities to watch them. Up on the fields on Cartworth Moor, they're a fantastic watch. And they were really one of the sounds of summer along with, and sights of summer along with the house sparrows making their noises. They've got very precarious nests at the end of a branch on a small tree or a bush, but they get along just fine by looking at it. And again, 4 to 6 eggs and up to 3 broods. As I said, they're quarrelsome. They do like a good rook. We have the greenfinch, squat bird with big fat beak. The male is what qualifies for the name greenfinch. It is greeny yellow. Again, it forms small groups, but it will form larger groups in winter, especially when there's loads of food. I only ever get 3 at any one time, usually 2 males and a female. They like lowland, farmland, hedges is a natural habitat. So if you're near any of that, you've got a decent corridor into your garden, you will attract greenfinches in. I'm seeing more of them this last year or so than they have been recently. I think they have been in a bit of a decline, but they seem to have made a recovery. That's not based on any scientific fact, but the fact that I'm seeing more of them. And they're very, very aggressive. They will boss the feeders. They are stroppy little so-and-sos, and nothing else gets in their way. They love sunflower seed, peanuts, and in the feeders. In the wild, they eat chickweed, dandelion, grain, etc. They nest in shrubs and trees. Again, 4 to 6 eggs, up to 3 broods. It's good for the old cut and paste, this presentation. And that's the female. As you can see, not green at all. It becomes another little brown jobby, almost like a sparrow. But yeah, if you look at the feathers at the back, you can see the yellow streaks. And as you get used to them all, you'll begin to notice the difference. And of course, the beak is a massive giveaway with the greenfinch, that big triangular seed-smashing beak. Chaffinch, lovely coloured bird. It's very timid than the other finches. It forms small flocks out of the breeding season and hangs around with finches and sparrows. And of course, another bird that I have not featured on this presentation, the brambling, will hang around with the chaffinches, and a lot of people do mistake bramblings for chaffinches. Sadly, I don't get many bramblings in my garden, but they are beautiful when you do see them. Chaffinches are birds of lowland, farmland, hedges, parks, gardens, etc. So they're fairly versatile. They're quite timid compared to the other finches. They do take second best at the feeders, and they're more reticent about jumping on the feeders in case the goldfinch swarm turns up, or in case the bullfinch is about, or the greenfinch, to give it a good ticking off. Love the sunflower seed mostly in the feeders, but they do eat grain, seeds, and invertebrates. They nest in holes, crevices in trees and buildings, etc. Have up to 7 eggs and up to 3 broods. And that's the female. So again, back to confusion about what's what. And you can see the feathers, the black and white wing feathers, but again, they're fairly grey, so easy to confuse with sparrows. And again, it's just experience and getting a bird book beside you and just looking them up and making mistakes and ask questions. Bullfinch, most people's idea of a beautiful bird, that along with the and a long-tailed tit, I suppose, and a goldfinch, I suppose, and the blue tit. In fact, they're all beautiful, really, aren't they? Very secretive, tend to keep themselves to themselves, hang around in small family groups or pairs. Quite often, if you see a female, you'll see a male. If you see a male, you'll see a female. They do tend to hang around together. Woodland undergrowth, thickets and shrubs, but they will come to the feeders, and they get increasingly more and more brave on my feeders, and I get 3 males and a female on regular intervals, and there's definitely 1 nest in my next door neighbour's garden, and it could have been up to 2 nests, so hopefully they're here to stay now. They, like the greenfinches, are a bird feeder bully. They really do go for it, and nothing else gets a chance, even if there's plenty to go around. Sunflower seeds in the feeders are their absolute favourite, and as you can see, they're pretty messy around the beaks, and then you'll see they're feeding away and get a big crust of food on the beak, and then they wipe it on the branch or the twig that they're standing on and start again. And they do enjoy in the wild native tree buds, berries, soft fruit and seeds. And if you own an orchard and you've got an apple blossom, and they will strip the buds quite quickly of an apple tree or fruit trees. They can be a bit of a pest in those situations in orchards, etc. Bushes about 1 metre off the ground. There are 3 to 6 eggs. Some manage up to 2 broods, and apparently they can have as many as 3. I think the ones around here had 1. And that's the female. Now, if it wasn't for the male being so spectacular, the female would be the pretty bird, but a lovely, beautiful beigey pink colour chest, and it really is a pretty bird. But of course, the male comes along with his pinky, at times quite scarlety breast, and that eclipses it completely. So poor old female made a good effort, but unfortunately, along comes the male. One of my favourite birds, another one. I've got about 10 favourites now, sorry about that. The nuthatch, absolutely beautiful little birds. 1 or 2 nasty little habits. They're elusive, and you'll probably hear them before you see them. In the breeding season particularly, very vocal with a whole variety of different sounds. If you do have access to some sort of web page or something that gives you bird sounds, have a listen to it. They really are fantastic. And when you get used to those sounds, you walk through Sands Woods, for example, down by the river, the noise is around about May is they really are quite noisy, especially around about 6 or 7 in the morning. They're beautiful little birds. They rarely move far from the base, so if you've got nuthatches coming into your garden, it means they're nesting nearby in a tree somewhere nearby or roosting nearby, and you'll tend to find once they're coming, they'll always keep coming unless the flock gets wiped out by a sparrowhawk, of course. It's the only British bird that can descend a tree head first, and it's quite good watching them. They're coming down. You can see those on that picture there. You can see the big claws, which are great for gripping on with. They love the sunflower seeds and they love peanuts. And of course they can hang on in any direction on the feeders, so you'll see them in all sorts of positions. Normally they would eat insects, etc., in the tree bark, and you can see its big beak for prizing insects out from underneath the bark. They eat seeds and acorns, etc., in winter. The beak is also quite handy as a weapon for other birds, because it can, as I said, one of the nasty habits it has, it does tend to frighten off the other birds around. It is quite a weapon. Excuse me, my son's brought me a coffee. He doesn't just do my IT for me, he brings me coffee as well. They nest in a hole in a tree, and they reduce if the tree hole's a bit too big, they will reduce the size of it with mud. I also watched one reducing the size of one in sands. I was watching it for ages, and it was reducing the size of the tree hull with dog poo. Oh God! So it's one of my favourite birds, but not quite so keen. 6 to 8 eggs, and maybe 2 broods. I had the great joy this year with C19. It wasn't a great joy having all my holidays cancelled. I do like to get away. I do enjoy my holidays abroad. But this year couldn't get away, so I was able to watch a nuthatch nest from initial selection when it was competing with a blue tit, not the great tit the earlier on, but this is a different one, competing with a blue tit for this hole here, up in a Tawny Woods, which is up on Cartworth Road. And the nuthatch won in the end, and I was great joy of going up nearly every day and watching it go in and out feeding, and then seeing the fledglings stick their head out. And then when the fledglings shot out, I couldn't believe the speed at which they shoot out and how quick they disperse from the nest. But it really was an absolute privilege to watch this nest from start to finish. And there we are. That picture is of the fledgling, and that was its final meal that the adults got before it decided it can go and fend for itself, or go and stand on a tree and be fended for by an adult away from the nest. And of course, being it was in a tree hole, they're coming out one at a time, and the strongest, of course, get to the top, and the weakest are at the bottom. And I have no doubt at all, with 6 to 8 eggs, there's 1 or 2 that didn't make it because they were trampled to death.